Hello, everybody. Thank you, Lindsay and Matt, for the previous section. This one is Agile while remote. So, Agile methods went mainstream in software development and are getting adopted beyond software. While working remotely over the last 8 months presented unique challenges and opportunities for the Agile community, and we are going to talk about this with our panelists today. My name is Jenny Loginov. I am the head of revenue at Miro, and I run go-to-market teams. I'm joined today by Cherie, Rebecca, and Henrik for the discussion. As a reminder, this session will be recorded and shared with all the participants in about a week. And at the end of the session, we will dedicate 10 to 15 minutes to questions. So please share your questions and vote for the questions in the Slido link that is provided in the comments. And with this, I want to hand it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Tell us who you are, what do you do, and tell us when was the first time that you started coaching Agile? Cherie, let's start with you.
All right, thank you. So I'm Cherie Silas. I'm in Dallas, Texas. I am the founder and head coach of Tandem Coaching Academy. And I started coaching in 2011. And my first real coaching assignment or coaching gig was at American Airlines. And I was there for about a year.
Rebecca?
Hi, my name is Rebecca Barra. I am the Senior Strategy and Operations Manager at Etsy, and my first coaching experience. So I actually started coaching as a consultant with this little software consultancy called ThoughtWorks. And my first client was a quality control client. They were starting to do discovery on a new program of work. So I went in with them for about a week, heads down, doing workshops every single day, ideating, planning out sprints, and scoping what then ended up becoming the future of one of their critical projects.
Thank you. And Henrik?
Hi, I'm Henrik. I'm the oddball here. I'm in Sweden, in Stockholm. It's night here, but not too late. 4 kids here that may burst in and cause noise or not. We'll see. I work mostly full-time doing Minecraft development, help design features and implement them, mixed with coaching. So at Mojang with the Minecraft teams, and try to help us figure out how to work effectively, which has become extra interesting during these times. And as for the Agile coaching thing, I kind of stumbled into it I think probably around year 2000, just before it was given the label Agile. But I was in a startup that had started growing, and I realized, oh, wait a sec, I have teams now. I got to figure out how we can work effectively. And I only knew how to fail because in the past I'd done a lot of development for companies that were doing kind of waterfall. And I was just used to big projects usually fail, and I knew exactly how to do that. But now I had my own team and my own startup and had to figure out how do we not fail. And I started looking around desperately for something and bumped into some of the material that later on condensed into Agile. And basically started applying it. So I'm not sure I would call it coaching. It was more, a practitioner. But then later that morphed into coaching.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us so late your time. And thank you, everybody, for the introductions. Let's maybe start with this question. So what are some of the common Agile practices that you have seen change since the start of the pandemic? And Cherie, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's not so much that the practices themselves have changed, but the way they're being done. The use of tools now has become more important than ever. So there was a time when we all believed that we must be co-located and all be in the same room to work together. And that works really, really great until you can't. And so now what we learned a lot in the last 9 months. And a big part of that is really the individuals and interactions over process and tools. Now more than ever, process and tools are needed to help individuals interact. So some examples of that are retrospectives. most people went from whiteboards and post-it notes in a room together where they played games and did different, different kind of collaborative exercises, to now where they're using electronic whiteboards or other methods, Zoom and Annotate. And we've really had to be creative on the tools that we've found to be able to get the same level of action. Things like the daily scrum, where when people were face to face in a room, often the scrum master, hopefully, was kind of hanging out in the back, and the development team was owning that, and they were collaborating. And now we're finding ourselves in this space where we're online, and there's a little bit more of a need for some facilitation just to kind of help us figure out all the pieces. And that may go away if this coronavirus doesn't go away. But I think this is one of the changes that came up. And I think things that people are having to be a little bit more creative on, things like pair programming and mob programming, where before we sat around a table and looked at the same screen and maybe one person on a keyboard, but now we're having to share screens on Zoom and find ways to be able to really communicate about the work we're doing. And so it's been a bit of a challenge, but I think that the tools, number one, tools have spun up really quickly and done a really fantastic job of keeping up with this market. And then also they've had to go out and just figure things out.
Thank you. Henrik, so about just before the start of the lockdown in January, you were in a conference and you talked about your view of the future of Agile. How did your view change in those last 8 months, the view on the future of Agile community and development?
I wish I remember exactly what I said then, but in general, my view on the future of Agile has not changed so much, I think. What I have been seeing in general is that Agile has become more kind of assumed. It's not this new kid on the block anymore. It's more like default in not all industries, but at least more than in the past. We don't seem as hung up on buzzwords anymore, at least from what I see. And it seems like these different methods are merging a little bit. It's not like you're either doing Scrum or XP or something else. It's more like, take a bit of what you need and mix and match. So a little more kind of relaxed about it is the trend I'm seeing. And it's definitely the same now with distributed. But I definitely want to echo the thing Sherry said about that we used to think that everything has to be co-located. And I've thought a bit about that. And I think at the time when Agile was formulated, we didn't have anywhere near the kind of tools we have now. So if you weren't co-located, it was really hard to work effectively. But now I've been kind of surprised at how effective it is when sitting distributed. And it feels in some sense like we are in the same room. If you have a video call open all day and we're sitting there all day and coding together and screen sharing and gossiping, and I'm like, yeah, this is like we're kind of in the same room. But there's one, I guess, aha for me. It's a hypothesis I've had for a long time, which feels like it's gotten confirmed now. And that is that distributed works if everyone is distributed. But the problem we've been seeing is often when you have like 5 people in one room and then one person on a screen. And then that person keeps getting forgotten and they're in a different place. But now when we're all distributed, we're all in the same place because we're all in the digital space. It's that one room, we're all in together. So it seems like being fully distributed or fully co-located, those seem to be the best 2 options rather than a mix of the 2.
Yeah, I totally
Yeah, I
agree.
just want to.
Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
I was hoping I could just sort of double click on what Henrik and Sherry just said. I think it's really important to think about how Agile practices have enabled us to work in this distributed world, right? When we're all distributed. One thing that really stands out for me is retrospectives. The use of retrospectives I've seen both in my teams and just talking with my peers in the industry, the use of retrospectives has gone way, way up, not just in using remote tools to be able to pulse check, but in doing the practice at all to get feedback proactively, iteratively, check in on how people are doing and pivot quickly. I really like the way Henrik framed out how we're now combining different methods of Agile, using them in this distributed world. And when we're all distributed, really seeing how they're able to help us improve.
Amazing. Thank you. I also feel that the disruption that COVID caused has a huge effect on the companies that you work at, right? Created new challenges that companies needed to react quickly to. Can you tell us a bit more about some of those challenges and how Agile helped you deal with this? Rebecca, can you share a story from Etsy?
Etsy, as I'm sure many companies, has quite a few stories around this. I'd say one of the most notable in the early days of the pandemic, the Centers for Disease Control, which is the Department of Health here in the US, went from declaring handmade masks were unsafe to declaring that they should be used given medical grade masks were in such short supply. This created a surge for demand for handmade masks specifically, and a couple of tweets from public figures later, Etsy's traffic was spiking off the charts in a way that we'd never seen before. This was and still is a really great thing. There was a sudden need for a unique handmade item that our sellers could fill in a way that no other mass retailer could. Because of that, though, engineering had to make a number of really quick adjustments. In addition to rapidly increasing our capacity in Google Cloud, which enabled the site to stay up during such an unprecedented spike, we also had to enable a more streamlined search experience. We showed results in the before times in a way that could create a situation where a shop owner who, mind you, is a team of one, a single parent, a single business owner, or just a few artisans together making products. So a surge to their shop could blow out their inventory quickly and end them up having far more demand than they actually did supply. Our search team worked over a really long weekend to build search guidance tools, including images, to help people browse masks more easily, which required updating our taxonomy, updating our query classifiers, amongst a number of other pieces of work. We also had to display a required warning for cloth masks, so it was clear that they are not surgical PPE, and that's a whole new feature that we added to the site. This was a pivot that we needed to make within a couple of days. You all know that when someone from our government, particularly our president, tweets something, it goes viral in an instant. So we had to be able to move really quickly. And because we have these practices that enable us to be agile, that enable us to pivot when we see a change coming, we were able to make those changes really fast. And these changes empowered our sellers with the ability to keep up with all of the orders that were coming their way. And we're talking in the tens of thousands, in the hundreds of thousands of orders per day. And it enabled our buyers to get the handmade masks that they needed to protect themselves and their loved ones during the pandemic. I really credit our ability to meet this need to the practices that we've been building over the past few years to be agile, to be flexible, and to quickly pivot when we see a change is needed.
Awesome. Thank you very much. My 13-year-old daughter created her shop on Etsy during the pandemic because she suddenly had a lot more time in her hands and wanted to create something and sell it. The other thing that she did a lot more was playing Minecraft. So, Henrik, what were the challenges or opportunities that you saw with the pandemic at Mojang? How did Agile help?
Well, we had a very much a culture of face-to-face direct communication, like the whole gang sitting like within shouting distance from each other. We were so spoiled with that. You just walk off and talk to somebody about something. So those spontaneous conversations get lost when everybody's home. So that was, I guess, from my perspective, one of the main challenges, because a lot of important decisions happen during those informal conversations between the meetings. But I think some basic agile practices have helped a lot. I would say I probably emphasize the daily stand-ups and the information radiators. So the fact that all the teams had from before this daily stand-ups and then these boards, which of course we kind of, the day everyone went home, we moved everything to Miro in like one day, just boom, echoing the walls. So the digital version looks exactly like the wall looked like. And then we just continued as before, but digital instead. But that meant that even though we lost a lot of the spontaneous conversations, the fact that we had these daily stand-ups and these visual boards, we could always see what are we doing? Who's working on what? Who should I talk to about what? And if I'm curious about something, I can just pop into that daily stand-up and ask a question or listen in. So that's been pretty crucial, I would say, to keep us aligned.
Awesome. Thank you. We started talking about documentation and sort of tools becoming more important. Can you tell me a bit about how this change of importance of documentation played into your practices, and which tools? How could Miro help, and maybe which other tools did you find helpful? Any of you, any who wants to jump in, just go ahead.
I nominate Sherry. Can I do
Well,
that?
thank you. You can nominate me. Well, I think what happened is documentation did become more important, or maybe it was realizing that companies and teams who had no documentation, and they were relying on tribal knowledge, and so the conversations that they were having around the tables, people suddenly found themselves off somewhere else working, by themselves from home, and a bit more isolated. So, in instances where they didn't just have somebody quick to reach out to, I think they needed the documentation to be able to know, well, what direction are we going? And it also helps with the coordination. Um, Things that, products that had to turn around on a dime, if people didn't know what was going on, or they had to be shifted to new teams because suddenly we don't need this thing we've been building anymore, we need this other thing. That's a lot of spin up time that has to happen. And so I think people started to realize that we've got to document our architecture. The industry, that I saw kind of as a whole, what happened was people took um, we don't, documentation is not a big thing. They went to a place of, instead of documentation being not the primary thing, to believing that documentation wasn't needed at all. We're agile, we don't need documentation at all. And then I think now it's coming back more to the middle, where people are realizing, okay, maybe we do need some documentation. And it's not that documentation is a bad thing, it's that documentation for documentation itself, that's a bad thing because it's waste. So we need to document what has to be documented so that we can communicate, so that we can collaborate. And even simple things like documenting the user stories or product backlog items in whatever tool that we're doing, that we're using, whether it's Jira or Rally or whatever those are, so that people can know what is the work we're working on. Having the product backlog, being clear, where before they were maybe relying on a couple of words on a post-it note and the conversations that went behind that. Because people are separate, there's fewer conversations. And so I think they're shifting more to first looking for documentation and then going to, to clarify that.
Sherry just dropped the mic on documentation.
Yeah. I can add some thoughts to that. I found that in general, organizations, if I'm going to, grossly oversimplify, they either have too little or too much, right? If you think of some kind of a sweet spot where nobody is, you're either too little or too much. It's very useful to be aware of which side of that, perfect spot are we? Do we have way too little or way too much? If I have to pick, I would rather have way too little than way too much. I find the damage is more if you have too much, because it causes waste and sometimes a false impression of knowing what's going on. But a lot of those documents get out of date and nobody maintains them. But given if I have to pick, I'd rather have too little. But nevertheless, if we have too little, we should find ways to improve it. Now, in our case, the Minecraft teams, I would say, put us on the side of too little, where we were often realizing we'd benefit by having more documentation. We have some waste just because stuff hasn't been written down. And that has been improving a lot over the past years, I would say, because there is a realization of this. So we've gradually started creating various sources of information that we try to keep up to date. And that has continued. So I haven't seen that has been affected so much by being distributed. It's an ongoing process of improvement that's been going on before and will continue after as well.
I'm with you, Henrik, on being in the too little documentation camp versus the too much. But I think the pandemic has shown us that there's more to documentation than just docs, right? There's something to be said about writing out your communications. As an example, Jenna, you asked what other tools we used. One of the tools that we use at Etsy is Slack. And we will actually proactively use Slack to have quick conversations, to answer quick questions. We also just adopted Stack Overflow. And as you know, Stack Overflow is just a list of question and answers. It's just a forum for those quick conversations. I think too often when we think of documentation, we're thinking of like business requirements documents or like a
Yeah.
fully scoped out project plan, right? It's not just that. It's those things that enable us to quickly get the information we need.
Yeah, that's actually I really strongly agree with that. That there is this kind of middle ground which we often forget, and I found a very useful kind of default practice for almost anything is when we've had a meeting, we often gather around the board and we're talking about something, and then after the meeting, take a screenshot of the board and send it to the right channel on Slack, and then that is documentation, and it's not super easy to find, but it is there. It costs almost zero time to create. Nobody's pretending to maintain it, but it does capture what we said. And that's like a minimum kind of like at least that. It's very useful.
Yeah, I think thinking
Awesome.
about documentation as an archive of a point in time is really important.
Awesome. I want to remind everybody who's listening and watching that we're going to have a Q&A in about 15 minutes. So if you want to go to the Q&A panel and vote for questions or ask yours, that would be awesome. I had a couple of follow-up questions. So Rebecca, I know that for about a year, you worked on rolling out the OKR planning model to all of the engineering team at Etsy. And I found it interesting. The OKR model has this reputation of being first top-down a bit and heavy in documentation. And I wanted to ask you, how does it kind of jive with the bottom-up and agile culture on the engineering team at Etsy that you created?
Yeah, this is a great question. I will say that it has been tough. Henrik, I appreciate you laughing. I feel like you have feelings. It's been tough in the sense of the OKR format is so heavy. It is so heavy. And there are ways to do it right and do it well and really get things flowing through OKRs. And there are ways to do it really wrong and pick up a lot of anti-patterns. But it takes practice and it takes iterating on using OKRs to really figure that out. I think one of the things that we've seen is in adopting the OKR format, it's not just thinking about how we write out our goals, writing out the objective as the North Star, using the KRs to identify the metrics that we're tracking to get there, but it's also been thinking about our culture. How do we talk about our strategy? How do we engage with our strategy? Xenia, you mentioned from our chat yesterday that Etsy's culture in engineering can be very bottoms up. We often look to our engineers as the folks on the front lines, the folks who see what's going on with the product, see what's going on with our systems, and raise what changes need to be made. That can be contentious with the idea of a strategy coming from top down. And so I think we found it's taken a bit of an exercise to, one, really get comfortable with a new and somewhat complex format, but two, figure out how to make that format work for us. So we have been doing it for a year. We're coming on to our fourth quarter of OKRs now. And something that we're starting to look at is what are the revisions and changes that we need to make to this program? How do we get back to the true intention of OKRs, like using the format to articulate business impact, to articulate value, but also enable our teams to be able to use their OKRs in a way that drive forward the tickets that they pick up and the priority of those tickets, drive forward how we scope out our work in our conversations, how we think about our progress in our retrospectives. So definitely some growing pains, definitely some room to grow. I think the OKR format has a lot of value, but it takes intention.
And what you see on the screen is our visual facilitator drawing the summary of what we're talking about. So we'll come back to this, I think, at the end of the section, and we'll see more what you drew. We are also in the middle of our Q4 OKR planning process, and I think one of the things that we learned here at Miro, or I think are learning every day that, as I think one of you were saying, that Agile is a collection of tools. It's not a goal in and of itself. That OKR is oftentimes thought of as the goal in and of itself and not the collection of
Ouch.
tools. And that's one of the biggest mistake that we could make.
Yeah.
It's just another tool for another problem.
Yeah. I find it very useful too. Whenever using any kind of tool, it's just to think about what is the underlying principle this tool is trying to implement, and just keep thinking about that. Because at some point, you might not need the tool; you can still implement the principles.
I love that. I like if I could tweet one thing from this panel, I would say, it's not always about the tool. It's about the principles. Sometimes you don't need the tool to implement the principles if you know what it is you're trying to accomplish.
And vice versa. Sometimes you specifically do need a tool to help you get into the principles.
Yes.
So that's contextual.
Yes. Very true.
Before we jump into questions from the audience, Sherry, I wanted to ask you this question. So you're an Agile coach who is coaching Agile coaches. What did you find? What did you find are the common problems of the Agile coaches who you're coaching, and what are the biggest pieces of advice you want to give to new coaches?
I think the most common problem industry-wide is that Agile coaches by title don't really understand what coaching is. And by that, I mean professional coaching, which should be the thing that underscores the way we coach. And many are actually, they're Agile consultants, which is not a bad thing. They're just not Agile coaches. It's a different thing. So the work that I do is really teaching coaches, people who are in Scrum Master, Agile coach, and enterprise coach roles, how to take professional coaching skills and incorporate those into the work they do, because it helps to be able to really give the ownership for change to the organization. And so it shifts the ability to create sustainable change, because the company actually owns their own growth and owns their own change. So where a consultant coach might come in, look around and say, here's all the things you're doing wrong and here's how to fix them, and I'll even fix them for you. Someone who's operating really from that stance of a professional coach who is working as an Agile coach will come in and ask questions. What's happening? What's broken? What do you not like? What are your pain points? Not, here's my pain point, you fix this. And because they're using that stance, they're able to also connect with the client. So rather than creating resistance by trying to force people to do what I want them to do because I'm the Agile coach, we're actually leaning into the pain and the things that they want to fix. So instead of creating resistance, we create momentum and sustainable change, because they own the decision. They own the change, and they're actually the ones accountable for making it happen, not the coach. And that might be very different as a consultant. So, so the big thing that I would say to everyone, I love that you're Scrum Masters. I love that you're coaches. I love that you want to be the best you can be. And the one thing you can do is invest in yourself and to learn professional coaching skills, because it makes a difference for you, it makes a difference for your career, and it makes a difference for your client.
I spent many years coaching coaches at Spotify, and before that, or after that, Lego, and I found it really hard. And I think this would summarize what it feels like to me. It's just really hard for some reason, and I agree with learning the basic coaching skills becomes extra important in that context, because I just found that this kind of style of personality of people that often become coaches, it just tend to run off, and really it's really hard to gather that group and create momentum and create like alignment, and it's a huge challenge. So I'm very impressed by people who can manage that job well.
Yeah, it's interesting because Agile coaching, or coaching in general, actually takes a lot of humility. And so the thing that I think people struggle with is I'm the expert. Like I'm the pro, I'm here to tell you what to do, which is kind of the opposite of humility. And what is really most effective is to be humble and be okay being wrong and to hold that client as resourceful and competent and able, like they were running the company before you got there. That's how they can afford to have you there. So obviously they're doing something. They know what they're doing, and you're there to partner with them, not come in and say, you're doing everything wrong. Let me tell you how to fix it.
I've actually found it very useful personally. It took a while for me to kind of notice it, but this kind of it's hard. It's easy to mix up the roles here. Am I the knowledge? Am I the subject matter expert of Agile, or am I the coach, or is it both, or what is it? And I found it useful to kind of be a bit schizophrenic and think of it as I have three hats, and I'm never wearing them at the same time. I can switch quickly between them, but at any given moment, it's one of the three hats, and it's either the coach, in which case I don't have any personal agenda other than helping that person with whatever they want to achieve. So I'm not giving any advice or anything. I'm asking open questions, etc. That's one hat. The other hat would be the kind of mentor, and then that's like the Agile side of it. Then I'm giving advice. I'm telling stories, sharing patterns and tools, but it's a different hat. And I still have no personal agenda other than to impart knowledge and ideas and inspiration. And then the third hat would be the change agent. And that's a different hat. In change agent, I'm actually trying to make something happen. I have an idea. I want us to become more aligned. And that's not really coaching. I'm trying to move us in some direction. And all three are powerful and useful, but it gets really weird when you mix those hats up.
Yeah.
I'm
It
actually
takes the
curious
self-control to know what to change.
I'm curious for your perspectives on when we find these anti-patterns in coaches, would we say that they maybe are not living true or acting true to Agile methodology, like to the manifesto, and not to be a sort of theory thumper here, but thinking about some of the pillars of Agile that we try to hold ourselves to and espouse. I tend to see these behaviors as anti-patterns. I see these behaviors as being the change agent and only the change agent, acting from the subject matter expert and not considering the humility it takes to coach, right? Or the skills that it takes to mentor. I'm wondering if you all see that as a disconnect with like the person doing the work and the person actually living the practice, because that's how I tend to see those behaviors.
I'm not sure I fully understood. Sorry.
So
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
I don't know that I want to point the blame at the person, like you're not Agile, that kind of thing. You're a walking anti-pattern. But I think the reality is that often people don't understand not just the Agile values, but the principles that support it, right? And so when they're doing things like stepping in and taking over, walking in and saying, manager, you go sit down, you don't have a space here, I'm going to instead do exactly what I just told you not to do. And then so we're not creating an environment where we're empowering people and trusting them to get the job done, right? So that, yes, those behaviors are anti-patterns. And I don't think it's intentional. I think we all do the best we can with what we have and what our knowledge is at the moment. And I know I can look back 5 years, 10 years ago and say, oh yeah, I totally, I completely, I rescind everything I said. Right. So, yeah, I think we all have individually anti-patterns, and
Right.
it's also a matter of growth.
Right. Okay, now I think I understand the question after hearing your answer. Sorry. But I think that reminds me of why, to me, these hats are so important, because when I'm wearing the coach hat, I don't care about Agile. It doesn't matter if they're following Agile or not at all. I'm trying to help them become self-aware of what they're doing. So if somebody's using top-down control in some scenario, maybe it's the right thing for that scenario. Who knows? I'm just asking questions and seeing if they're aware of what they're doing and if they're happy with it. But maybe wearing the Agile mentor hat, then I'm explaining how things work in Agile, what the thinking is behind it, and giving tips and techniques. And those are just different mindsets, and I find it useful to separate them.
Yeah.
Awesome. I want to invite the audience into our dialogue. I will read through some of the questions that we have on Slido, and you can continue, by the way, asking questions and voting for questions. We have some time to go through those. The first one is, what techniques can you recommend for a facilitator to cope with the lack of visual clues and body language feedback during the group calls and workshops now that we are all remote?
Well, that's a good question.
Ask. So I will often find myself facilitating workshops. Many of my stakeholders are based on the East Coast, and I've now been on the West Coast for a year. And I would literally ask, how are we feeling? How are you doing? What does that sound like to you? If you see a furrowed brow, ask the person to talk about what they're feeling, and make it really easy for people to give you feedback on how they are experiencing the thing that you're facilitating. So I'll often do fist of 5, which you folks might be familiar with. Throw up a 1 if you're not feeling great, throw up a 5 if you're feeling awesome, or anywhere in between. And that really easily allows them, whether it's in chat or through video, it really easily allows them to tell you how they're doing. I know it sort of sounds simple, but I realized,
great.
well,
Yeah.
if I want to know,
Simple
I
is
have to
good.
ask.
And I'd like to yes it now. Oh, go ahead, Henry.
I just want to share like a bit of an aha I've had since this whole going home thing happened. There is this kind of cultural assumption that if you're in a meeting, you should be present and engaged, and if not, something's wrong. It seems to be kind of the assumption in many contexts. If I'm in a meeting and some people are starting to do something else and check email stuff, then oh my god, I'm doing something wrong. And I've started to challenge that assumption. Because I've noticed that there are different types of meetings. Like if we have a meeting where we're trying to solve a specific problem with specific people, then I would expect everyone to be engaged. And if they're not, then probably as facilitator, I would want to find out. I would ask questions like Rebecca talked about and find out what can I do to increase energy level, take a break or shift something. So I would see that as a problem that needs to be solved. But in other contexts, like for example, when we have our daily stand-ups, we often follow that up with discussions. So we kind of identify what stuff we want to talk about. And then we have discussions, and people stay around. They come and go. Some are sitting and programming in the background, or doing email, or having breakfast. And I don't even know who's engaged. I see 10 faces on the call. I hear maybe 3 voices. The rest, I don't know what they're doing, and I don't really care either. They choose to be here. It's a law of 2 feet. They're clearly interested. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. And they may leave at any time, and that's perfectly fine. So I think something has changed. When we're all sitting in the same room, it gets a little bit weird if somebody's in the room but ignoring the meeting and doing something else. But in a distributed call, it doesn't get as weird. It's like, okay, yeah, sure. I'm hearing the conversation going on. I don't care too much about this, but I still want to listen in because suddenly something might pop up that I do care about. So in the meantime, I'll just sit here and code in the background. It's an interesting shift. I don't know if you've seen any of that too.
Yeah.
And I think one last thing about the question of when I can't see and I can only hear. I think that's where the coaching skills we talked about are really, really important. So learning to hear what you can't see. You can hear hesitation in someone's voice. You can hear when their tone changes. You can hear when their pace picks up. So that's one aspect of it, is learning to really listen to people so that you know what's happening. And the other piece comes in from a systems coaching perspective. If I'm coaching a team, even if I can't see them because they're not on video for whatever reason, I can hear what's happening and I can reflect that back. So Henrique said this. What's that like for y'all to hear that? What's your response to that? What's another perspective, right? So then where people may have been silent, I say something and they're like, that's weird. So instead of just bypassing that, by me inviting them in, then they get the opportunity to give a different perspective. But it's really important to let your ears get what your eyes can't.
Thank you. There's another question on this, like lost information, that is also great. That is about the use of backlogs. So we all use backlogs, the Jira and Trello and Azure and so on. But it feels that some information is often lost in those. Any tips that you can share about planning products effectively using backlogs?
Keep them short.
It's the conversation behind the card that hasn't changed, right? So the card is a placeholder for a conversation, and then have the conversation, talk through it all, and document what you need when you're done. Like you don't have to document everything, but document what is necessary for you to remember the conversation.
I would add one more thing, maybe, which is that. Sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
No, I was literally about to plus one you on keeping it short, and just say like backlog grooming is super important. If information's getting lost, why? Is it old? Is it stale? Did we not record something? Just grooming the backlog and keeping it short. Please proceed.
I've come to see backlogs as a very kind of fluid thing. If you look at Scrum, the way it's just defined, it sounds kind of static, like the backlog. It's this prioritized list of things, and we work off them in priority order. It's a little bit simplistic, I find. I like to think of it more like we have a number of different piles, which we may call a backlog. Some of them are like, this is what we're working on right now. This is our current focus. That's very useful to have, but that should be quite short. Some are more like a pile of ideas, random ideas that we would like to capture somewhere. Those aren't prioritized. They don't maybe need to be prioritized. And some may be, items that we've committed to. We want to make a list of things we've committed to for other teams or customers. That's really important to visualize. So there's different types of things you might put in what we might call backlogs, but just be aware of what is it? Is it something we're maintaining and committing to, or just a random pile of stuff? And be explicit about that, and instead of making assumptions. But keep it short, because just maintaining long backlogs, I find, is generally a waste. It creates this false sense of we know what's going to happen when we often actually don't.
There is a follow-up question to Rebecca, what you mentioned, sort of ad hoc conversation documentation in Slack. That I think the question is broadly about how to do Slack properly. The person is asking that I find that using Slack to obtain decisions often results in endless conversation, and things often get lost. How do you ensure the decisions are made, in using Slack in those ad hoc communications?
So the mic was cutting out a little bit. Just to make sure I understand the question.
Yeah. So using Slack to obtain decisions often results in endless conversation, and things often get lost. How do we ensure that the decisions are actually made when we are on Slack?
So I think it depends on the size and the importance of the decision, right? If it's something small and quick that you're about to immediately action, more than likely you're going to get your approval from your manager or get agreement from your teammates and then go off and do the work. So oftentimes Slack has a feature where you could save a chat. I will sometimes take screenshots and put them with my notes, and usually that helps me find. But if the situation warrants a decision that is higher priority, that is a little more complex, you're going to want to record that somewhere. Yes, that's discoverable by everyone, but is sort of thought of as less ephemeral than Slack. I would say important decisions their final resting place probably shouldn't be Slack, because the expectation is Slack is going to be come to asynchronously. Depending on your company's retention policy, it'll be there, maybe it won't. You don't want your final decisions to live there. So the way I like to think of using Slack is as a tool for quick communication. If I need rapid answers or I need a small decision. But if it's something bigger, I'll tend to take that to email because email is retained for longer. Or I'll set up an actual conversation and maybe put my initial thoughts in some sort of document or external tool that allows more people to interact with it and collaborate on it in real time. Sorry, one more thought. There's no right way to use Slack. I really like Slack, but I think you can. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. It's so customizable. There are some principles to good communication.
Wouldn't
I'll
it be
give you
nice if
that.
there was one single best way to do it?
Say again. Sorry.
No, just joking. But wouldn't it be nice if there was one single best way to use the tool?
Okay. Yes.
Oh,
It
yes.
would be nice.
But no, there
We
isn't.
have a question. We have a question that is very kind of near and dear to my heart. So Miro is a very distributed team. We have a team in Russia and the team in Amsterdam and the team in San Francisco and LA and Austin and so on. And the question is about how do you do agile effectively with teammates that are in 3 different time zones, plus 13 hours, plus 3 hours, while maintaining healthy work-life balance and working 9 to 6 Pacific time. I think the person is in Pacific time zone. Any thoughts on collaborating and doing agile across many, many different time zones?
I've never seen
I
it done
would say-
effectively. It might be possible, but I haven't seen it. So please enlighten me.
Yeah, I have plenty of thoughts on this, and most of them are don't do it.
Yeah.
But really, it's a question of how do we organize in a way that's going to be the most effective. And so while that is not a team decision, right, it's probably a decision that goes higher up for the company. If they really want to work in a distributed environment, they should make choices to make that distributed environment the most productive that it can. So while we can take people in a bunch of different, very disparate time zones and put them together on a team, what it won't do is make things move faster, because it's likely that they'll be communicating by email. I have a question in India, send it to the United States while they're sleeping, and then in the morning they'll answer me. And then they'll say, I didn't really understand the question. And then when I wake up 12 hours later, I'll answer that. So then something that could have been a 2-minute conversation has turned into a 3-day conversation. And so the cost of doing business that way is extremely high. And so I think it starts with leadership, making business decisions that will help the company be able to be more agile in order to meet business objectives. All that said, you can't at the team level control that, but what you can control is how you work together. What I've seen some organizations do, if they had the flexibility and leadership allowed them this ability, is they worked adjusted working hours. So if they're on a 12-hour flip cycle, then one group shifted their hours to 5 or 6 hours earlier, and the other shifted their shift to 5 or 6 hours later, so that there was always a core of working hours. So the one thing I caution about this is that doesn't mean you work from 7 a.m. till midnight, which is what I often see people doing. It means you work from 11 to 10 or 8 or whatever that cycle is. And so we don't expect people to come in at 7 a.m. if they have to work with a group, at 10 p.m. So it's up to the company to recognize sustainable pace, and the individuals to talk about sustainable pace, and to not create an environment where we, like in the background under the covers, work all these extra hours, because what that does is it creates a false sense for the company that we're doing a good job and we can handle this at a sustainable pace, because the reality is they often don't know you're working 16 hours a day. They think you're working 8 hours.
And even if you aren't, when you shift that, you shift your like daylight cycle or your day cycle. That works if you don't have a family. But if you do have a family, that's going to mess things up anyway.
Right.
So it's
Yeah, and
I
that's
find
why
in
it
general,
becomes really important.
I would go to great lengths to reorganize in a fashion so that we can at least be in the same rough time zone, plus minus 2 hours. I think that's worth so much. At least if it's a team that is doing something complex that requires collaboration. If they're doing something less complex with less dependencies and then there's less need for a lot of communication, then it's probably not a big deal.
So I was not expecting to be the contrarian opinion here, but I actually do think it can work. But I want to yes and both of you in that one, it takes leadership alignment. Two, it takes being really intentional. Three, it takes reducing dependencies. I was actually taking notes as we were talking, and making sure folks are working at a sustainable pace. So in addition to my agile coaching, in my career, I've also done project management, and I've project managed distributed teams across the US and India and across the US and South America. And some of the practices that I saw when we were doing it well, because mind you, it's really easy to do this very poorly. When we were doing it well, the behaviors that we took into account was one, making sure that there was some time overlap, right? So making sure that even if it was just an hour or two a day, that the two separate groups, the two separate time zones or more, were able to sync up together and were able to talk to each other about what they were working on and what was going on. I would say the two other things that we did was scoping work in such a way that we reduced dependencies. So a certain team would work on a certain set of features. The other team would work on the other set of features. They'd come together to talk about the progress of the product overall. And there would be a scrum master or a product owner who was responsible for making sure the different pieces that were being built were cohesive, but they were able to work autonomously. And then the last thing that we did that I've seen be very effective and I've seen us not do and be kind of terrible for the person in the situation was making sure it's more than one person in each of those time zones. And we've talked about this a little bit already, right? I think, Henrik, at the beginning of our call, you mentioned if you're a distributed team, you can't have one person distributed and everyone co-located. It's the same thing with multiple time zones. If it's one person having to essentially go the extra mile to make it work, it doesn't matter if you're agile, if you're waterfall, whatever, it's going to be difficult for that person. And that friction is going to show up in the work. So a spicy pepper opinion, I think it can work, but you have to be really, really intentional.
Yeah, for us, I think we realized that we need to make hard decisions. So the entirety of our engineering product organization is based in Europe, and I think we made a hard decision that there are amazing product managers, engineers, product designers in the US, in New York, in San Francisco, everywhere else, but we cannot afford to start hiring there just because of the problems that it will create with time zones. So we'll happily hire anybody who will relocate to Amsterdam or Russia for that matter, but probably not. It doesn't make sense to create a team in the US if we don't have the team already. As the last question, I want to use it maybe to get personal advice. As I shared with you, I have the suspicion that Andrei had his plan putting me to moderate that panel. So I'm running the go-to-market teams at Miro, and on the product development side, we follow the agile practices. On the go-to-market side, less so, maybe not at all so. And I think Andrei will try to convince me of switching the mode of operating for about a year, and maybe had a hope that in this session he'll change my mind. I think I'm sort of mentally converted, but I would love to get your advice for somebody who is starting to think about how to transition go-to-market teams, especially to working in agile, while most of the members of those teams have never had exposure to agile methodology. What would be the advice that you'd give to us?
Okay, can I do the coach thing and answer the question with a question?
Go ahead.
Why would you want to go agile?
We realize that as the company is growing larger, it takes a lot longer to get any results done if you do top down, and we'd much rather have 15 different go-to-market teams that run their own projects and can deliver a lot more results than we'd have 3 or 4 top-down teams that can deliver much fewer results. Any tips or advice for the novel build teams?
Well, I think where Henrik was headed with that was understand why. First, what are the business objectives that you're trying to reach? And what is stopping you from reaching those right now? Is it that by the time you deliver something, your customer's like, yeah, I solved that myself 6 months ago? Well, then maybe you need to do something that is going to get your speed to market so that the customer can get the features in their hands. Is it that, quality is bad? Well, then maybe we need some engineering practices that will help, and being able to balance your product backlog with engineering and product and business features is going to be helpful. The big question is it's always, always, always about business results. It's not about Agile. Agile's not the goal. Agile is a mechanism to get business. And so what I guess if I had advice, it's don't worry about Agile, worry about your business, worry about your customers. What's impeding your ability to get the right product into the hands of your customers when they need it to take advantage of the market? And if you can't do that, look at what Agile might provide that can help you to close those gaps. And even if you just add one thing at a time, it will help you with business agility, which is really the goal. And I hope that makes sense. Like, Agile's not the goal. Business agility and business outcomes are the goal.
Yeah, we are trying to do it iteratively. So we have a couple of pilots going on right now, and we'll hopefully learn and do more and more. So small steps at a time.
There are two kind of opening moves that I often resort to, in almost like most cases. If I don't know how to get started, I would do this. One is just visualize stuff, make things extremely visible. If they aren't already, just what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What's our focus? Who's working on what? What are our priorities? Just whatever, make stuff super visible. And then the second thing is usually what are the feedback loops? How do we know that we're delivering anything useful? Who are our customers, and what can we do to shorten that feedback loop? And I find that a lot of stuff sorts itself out after that, because you understand what you're doing and you have a fast feedback loop. You'll start quickly noticing, as you try to speed up the feedback loop, you start noticing what's in the way, what's stopping you from doing that. And that tends to kind of get you on the journey of getting more agile almost automatically. So yeah, I usually start with that, visualize stuff, and then try to find ways to shorten the feedback loop.
Thank you. Well, visualize is a great segue. We are coming to the end of our section. I'd love to see the notes that Beata, our visual facilitator, took during the section, if we can switch to that on the video. And while we're switching, I want to thank Shiri, Rebecca, Henrik, all of you for doing this. Those are Beata's notes. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with the team. For everybody who's watching, a reminder, the session has been recorded, so it will be shared with all of you in about a week. Right now, we're going to have about an hour of a break. Thank you so much, and welcome to the next section of Distributed in an hour.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.